But I was able to then receive the Louisville Institute study grant. So that was what kind of helped to guide my sabbatical, was the study grant, because I needed to create then a research or a study question and to have a study that I would then be reporting on. So go ahead. I'll be writing a paper about my conversations with these folks. So that's Northwest Coast Presbytery, Lutheran Synod in Vancouver, BC, Lutheran Synod in Seattle, Presbytery in Cincinnati, Episcopalian Diocese in Newark, British Methodist System, Fellowship of Christian Churches in the UK, in Birmingham, Church of England in Birmingham, and then Western England Baptist Association. So those were my conversation partners. And my question is this: what kind of leadership at the regional church body level is needed for missional transformation? So what kind of leadership at the regional level is needed for missional transformation? Go ahead. So this first thing that I talked with some of the leaders about, that I was wrestling with, is, what is my role? I'm not the pastor of a congregation right now. I'm serving as your pastor, right? What is my role in terms of the congregation? And it's like, what is my role in terms of the vision? And where's my authority? And what's my purview and responsibility and all that? Because that's kind of an interesting boundary thing, really. And what I came to is that, my role is not to make all of these 43 churches missional in my understanding of what that means. My role is with the presbytery, and I have a vision for this presbytery as a missional presbytery, but just kind of helping to discern and differentiate and letting go of and allowing that responsibility to become more clear. The necessary leadership capacity, that was the question, as I said, as I interviewed all these folks. There were 21 interviews that I did. Go ahead. These are the things that I found, basically. That previous training, skills, and knowledge is insufficient for facing the future. Number 2, that the future is uncertain. Number 3, that there needs to be some kind of wondering or curiosity on the part of the leader, an openness, an inquisitiveness. And fourth, and probably the most important, is a sense of humility. That came out in our sharing this morning with our passage, that humility, that openness, that sense of needing help. That's going to be really crucial, and it's going to be a key part of my paper, which I'm going to be writing in the next 2 months. And go ahead, and I'll be sharing with you those that want to hear more about leadership and think more about leadership at the next Presbytery gathering. This was another learning. I'm convinced that we need to hire a part-time staff person to help coordinate this ministry at the presbytery level. We are at a plateau. We talked about tipping point, which I'll talk about in a moment. And for this to really go any deeper, we need to have somebody that can focus on this, even if it's just 8 to 10 hours a week. Something that can be their primary focus. I have let go of things that I've been doing with the counseling of my mentor and my coaches, in terms of just what are things that I don't really need to be doing that I can focus on this. But I'm at a point where there are just some things that I have to do in this role, and there's only so much time that I can give to this. And so to have someone else come alongside in that is important, and the leadership team will be talking about that. They've talked about it some, but we'll be talking about that some more. So lastly, again, I'll be sharing about some learnings at the November Open Space. So that's about leadership. Tipping point. Those of you who were at the Presbytery gathering in May at Spalding, remember that we talked a lot about this tipping point. We're at a crucial point here. We're on this edge of missional transformation, and to see lasting impact, we need to expand the missional practices and the conversations throughout the presbytery. I don't want Future Church to be just this once and done kind of program thing that we did. If we want to have any kind of long-term impact, we need to push through this plateau period right now. Okay. So those were the learnings for leadership. Learnings for system change. Like I said, we need to hire a part-time staff person. Number 2, importance of location. Doesn't it feel a little bit different to have presbytery here at the university instead of in one of our churches? Do you feel that difference? The importance of place or location, or the importance of space. That's another thing that I learned in talking with people. This is at another university. This is a Cincinnati Presbytery gathering, like a future church gathering, but it's at a university. They were very intentionally spent the money and the time to go beyond their church building, literally as they gathered, so to continue to embody what they're talking about. So in future church, we talk about going beyond our church walls. So it's important then when we gather to have that experience. It opens up our minds. It opens up a sense of the unfamiliar. There's a lot of reasons why. And so we're going to be exploring with the leadership team where are other alternative places that we could be gathering as a presbytery, and as, as the trustees or whatever the committee is or whatever, being in an alternative location changes the impact. And I would encourage you guys just to try an experiment of, like Norman's church did once, where your session just meets somewhere else. Not somebody's home and not somebody's not within your church building, but just some other alternative location, and see what it does to the dynamics of your meeting or your gathering. Okay, and the third one, systemic change requires more breadth and depth of missional practices throughout the system. So in essence, this is what I heard over and over again, that these regional systems, these 9 systems, who I would say for the most part are a little bit farther along on this road or on this journey than we are, all of them are doing these missional practices every time they gather in some form. Now, they can't always do a long 40-minute dwelling like we did this morning, and I get that. They shorten it and condense it at times in different ways. But they're always doing some form of the missional practices, either reflection at the end of where they sense the Holy Spirit, or talking about an experiment they're going to do, like maybe you guys experimenting with your sessions. There was a missional practice that was incorporated or characterized every time some form of the regional body gathered. So let's go ahead and listen to Greg Jacobs. He is one of the staff people. He's from the Episcopal Diocese of Newark, and he talks a little bit about Israel, the people of Israel, being on the edge of the river, and how his staff and his diocese have had to really intentionally cross that river. That is their primary narrative that they're working with as a diocese. So let's listen for Greg.
The whole idea that you have all of these tribes of Israel that are so different, and each one of those tribes has a different motivation. And you imagine some of them saying, "I'm not going across the river. I don't care what you're talking about." You got another group that's saying, "Let's go back to Egypt. Things are a lot better there." And then you've got some of those who genuinely said, "There's no life for us on this side of the river. God promised us this." And so then to start to pick out of that narrative pieces that we can connect. And that's really what our staff work did. We started to say, okay, what does it look like to be on this side of the river? And we immediately connected that to, continuing to do the same things we've always done. And started to build, in various ways, a narrative around that started with the bishop's address where he talked about the 4 B's, the killer bees as he called them, and then said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot do business as usual." And to stay on this side of the river, using that image, means that we're doing business as usual. Our future, the future that God calls us to, is on the other side of the river. And then to start using our collective imaginations to talk about, so what's going to be, what's on the other side of the river. And the more we got into it, then the more detailed it became, and you started reading more of the scripture, and it was, okay, the next narrative is about them actually crossing the river. And dwelling in the Word was so helpful around that, because then, the lens shifted to that particular piece of the narrative and saying, okay, so what does it mean to stand in the river? And there's so many different imaginative pieces that you can take with that. What do we say to the people who are saying, I don't really want to cross the river? Where's hope in that? Well, the hope is in that even though you're on this side of the river, that at some point you recognize that there is no future for you on this side of the river, that the only future that's viable and vital is on the other side of the river. So I think it was just coming up with that image and then just letting it dwell in us. And as staff really started to resonate with that model, saying, okay, yeah, this is a model that we can present to our congregations. And I think the most important thing was it was a hopeful model.
So it was a hopeful model. Let's just go ahead and stop it right there. And I think that's something that we all need to lift up for our people. The fourth learning is creating new worshiping communities. We used to call it new church planting, now we call it new worshiping communities, and there's a reason for that, because we're not adopting the old model that Scott and I actually did several new church plants that were the old NCD model, and that just isn't working anymore. We need to look at this new worshiping community model, and every one of those 9 systems that I met with had some form of a new worshiping community as part of what they were about. It's no coincidence that they had that life infusing into some of them, their declining systems. So that's really important. I happened to be at Cincinnati Presbytery when their vision team gathered, their corresponding committee like our vision team, and go ahead. And they Zoomed in or Skyped in this guy named Nick, who's the director of Cyclical LA down in, what presbytery is that? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Down in, yeah, but it didn't come out of Pacific Presbytery. Anyway, LA area where Ken Baker is. But anyway, so listen, I would like us to begin exploring this, especially once we have the information from the reflection team about Latah Valley. So we want to reflect on what we've done with Latah Valley and then jump off, springboard off from that into a possible new worshiping community understanding of Presbytery. Go ahead.
Lately, there's been a surge of new churches across America, and we've noticed a pattern. A leader begins by thoughtfully discerning how to start a new church. The new church begins, and eventually that community is no longer a new church, but simply a church. Unfortunately, the cycle of the church all too often stops there. We're here to keep the cycle moving forward. We're here for the discerners, because too many future church starters are trying to figure out their next steps alone. We're here for the starters, because too many break down somewhere between the vision and the practicalities. We're here for the churches, because too many haven't yet imagined starting new churches.
So essentially, the model is discerners, starters, and churches. So basically, they create an environment where the regional body or the presbytery has an expectation of creating new worshiping communities, and then gathers together discerners, folks that might sense a potential calling to this ministry, and then they gather together those that are starters, and so there's a community of folks that through a cohort who are actually starting new worshiping communities, and then they gather together those churches once they are actually launched and everything. So it's just this model, and the basic concept is that it's an expectation, or it's a model where this is just the natural flow. This is how all of your churches, by and large, were started, by folks who felt a call to, have a church in this area and followed that call. So that's something that we want to begin to explore. Nothing's been decided. I know this is just the first intro to this, but we want to begin to explore this. Okay, and lastly, the fifth learning that I want to share with you is that the clearest evidence of missional transformation was in the questions being asked. In other words, were they God questions or church health questions? God questions or church questions, or you can say God's agency versus church health. Most of the time, the questions that I hear from us, and this is normal, but most of the time I hear things like, how do we get more young people back to the church? Or how are we going to meet the budget? How are we going to continue on and sustain our ministry? Those are church questions, and those are heartfelt, and I understand that. But we need to get back to the God questions. Where is God at work in our neighborhoods? What is God calling the church to? What is God's mission here? Do you see the different shift? The focus is everything. It may seem really slight, but the focus makes all the difference in the world. And so was the greatest difference, I would say, with these other regional bodies. I heard these people at Cincinnati asking these God kind of questions. And they're in decline too. So it's not just a matter of, they're a thriving congregation or they're a thriving presbytery or whatever. They're facing some of the same challenges that we are. So are the Episcopalians in Newark. So are the Lutherans in Vancouver, BC. So are Fellowship of Christ churches in Birmingham and in Bristol. The Baptists, it doesn't matter what denomination they're in or a non-denom even. What matters is what is the primary question that's guiding them as a church or as a regional body. So that's my challenge for us as we continue on in this new learning community phase, to really pay attention to what questions we're asking, because therein I think lies where our heart is and where our real theology is. One last video. This guy was Nigel Coles. He was he's from Bristol, and he's going to talk a little bit about those God questions. Later.
Yes, it does, yeah, but we're trying to find some, I suppose frameworks is a word in jargon, isn't it, but trying to give people a bit of a sense. So in terms of, you were talking about capacities, I think that kind of being anchored in that sense of, well, actually it's the mission of God that we're about. We want everything we do and we want who we are to be seen to be coming out of that. And whilst I would use the language of we're not sure where that's taking us, and we don't understand, I think increasingly I recognise that people need a sense of this is what it might look like, but what it might look like is actually your friend, your colleague at work, your neighbour encountering Jesus for themselves. And it's feeling increasingly necessary to actually state that's what we're looking for. So it's not a destination in terms of when you're working from a church base, you're kind of struggling because you're saying, well, we don't know what church will look like, and everyone gets anxious. But I think if people know that the what you're focused on is actually seeing people come to know Jesus for themselves, then it feels like people are a bit more content to go here, there, or wherever if that's the destination, and you can help them understand that these, what appear to be wanderings, are actually helpful.
They're part of the
if you
journey.
Can keep them. Yeah, we don't like using the word goal these days, but keeping people focused on the realization of the mission of God in ordinary people's lives is the destination. That kind of feels like that's helpful. So the anchoring in where you start from, I think, is really important, and some clearer focus that I think we're getting bolder in talking about what the focus might be, but it's around God in people.
That's beautiful. Don't you love his accent? It's around God in.
Yes, it does. Yeah, but we're trying to find.
Yes. Okay, so for the next few minutes, the vision team would like some feedback about these 5 learnings. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So we weren't going to have like specific tables, but I'm realizing, there's way too many of us really to have only 5 conversations in this room. So what I'm thinking is we'll just do it by table. So hopefully you guys as a table can just decide on which of these 5, go ahead, all of them, 5 things you would like to talk about just for about 15 minutes or so. And then you're going to share, so forget the names after these things. You're going to share on one of those big butcher sheets one thing. I know we're not good with narrowing, but one thing that you think the entire presbytery needs to hear that came out of your conversation. Okay? So as a table, work together and pick one of these areas and have a conversation, and then write down one thing that the vision team needs to hear out of your conversation. Does that make sense? Okay, ready, go.
Lost her too.